Hi, I'm Allie with the Potomac Bead Company, and I'm going to go over square stitch with you. Square stitch is a stitch that looks a lot like ladder, and unlike peyote, you're going to have beads that are lining up right over top of one another. I'm using cubes for this because it's an easy show. It is a little bit of a longer stitch, and it takes a little bit more time, but if you're not putting anything on top and you're not embellishing, then you want to do this because it's going to be a tighter knit versus just a ladder, which is a little flimsy if you're not embellishing the top. So what I've started out here with is a stop bead, and then I have 4 3mm Miyuki cube beads, and I'm using .006 wildfire thread and a beading needle. I have 4 beads on, and that's how wide it's going to be. I slide them down next to my stop bead, and I'm going to put on my first bead of my other color. What I'm going to be doing is a circle, so I'm going to let that bead drop down next to the beads that are already there. And I'm going to grab that third bead, or that fourth bead there, and sew back through the fourth bead. So I have on my bead of a different color, and I'm sewing back the same direction that the thread's coming out of my last silver bead. So the last one of the first row. And what that's going to do is create that bead sitting right on top of the silver bead. I sew back through in a circle through that next bead. And then I'm going to add another bead. When I add the other bead, I let it drop down on top of the next bead in the row. So you're seeing that they're going to line up right on top of one another. And what I'm doing is always picking up the bead that's right below the bead that I'm adding, and I'm sewing back through that bead. My needle is always going to be going from left to right. Pull that tight. And my needle then, to get back up to the top, is going to go back through the last bead that I added from right to left and pull tight. This is a stitch where you will see the thread a little bit, so you want to match that up with your beads. Again, another bead goes onto my needle. I sew through the second bead that I put on from left to right, and then from right to left through the next bead. And I continue with this the whole way, adding my rows. So here I finished row 1, row 2, row 3, and I'm just going to show you again how you start over just so you get it. So my first bead of my 4th row goes on next to my thread, my last bead. In order to make it sit on top, I'm going to sew from left to right through the bead below it in the last row. Pull tight, and that'll make the bead sit right on top. My needle then goes through that last bead that I just put on, and I add the next bead in my rotation. Next bead goes on, drops down next to the bead before it, and it goes underneath needle to the bead that was right underneath it on the previous row. And then I sew through that and keep adding. So again, it's a little bit slower to get that same ladder stitch look, but you will see the thread. So if you're using something other than a cube, you do see a little bit more thread, but it's more stable and it's a little bit less easy to break than just a regular ladder stitch bracelet. So if you're not embellishing and you want that straight across look or the stripe looks, the square stitch is a great option.